Hi everyone, welcome to the NASEO webinar on advanced technology in a resilient electric grid. I'm just gonna wait a couple of minutes as attendees are trickling in. There's always a slight delay when we open these webinars. All right, as people are trickling in, welcome to the NASEO webinar on advanced technology in a resilient electric grid, assessing risks and planning for the future. We're really excited to provide you with this webinar. I'm Kirsten Workless. I'm the Managing Director of Electricity and Energy Security at NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials. And before we get started, we'll do the obligatory how do Zoom meetings work, even though you're all pros now. If you go to the next slide, just a quick note that this is a webinar format, so only the presenters will be on screen and will be unmuted. And if you have any tech issues, please don't hesitate to chat Kelsey Jones in the chat box or email her at kjones@naseo.org. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, please enter them through the Q&A feature, or you can put them in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we have a great lineup, and before I turn it over to Paul Heitmann to lead us through, here's just a quick rundown on the agenda. We'll hear from him to have opening comments and introductions, and then we hear from our speakers, who Paul will introduce in a moment. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have Q&A and open discussions, and then end the webinar at 4 p.m. Eastern. Next slide, please. We're really excited to have this webinar because I think there's a lot of discussions in the States on kind of how can we make sure that as we're moving towards a more clean electric grid, how can we also make sure that that is a resilient grid, and how can we kind of make the three-legged stool of resiliency, clean energy and electricity, and equity happen in the States. And so I'm really excited to have the three speakers we have today talk about this and let us know a little bit more and give us food for thoughts as we're thinking about that through the NASEO membership and in the States. And with that, I will turn it over to Paul Heitmann, who works in the Clean Energy Division of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, who will introduce our speakers. And thank you, Paul, so much for moderating today's webinar. Over to you.
You're welcome, Kirsten. Thank you, and thanks to NASEO for having me and representing New Jersey. You're kind of on the front lines of grid modernization, clean energy. Many states have aggressive clean energy goals, as you know, that really are designed to support both central and distributed generation. On May 23rd, 2018, our governor, Governor Murphy, directed our Energy Master Plan Committee, which is chaired by New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, a staff member of that, to complete an energy master plan that would provide a comprehensive blueprint to achieve 100% clean energy by 2050. The other part of that metric was an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, came along with that. That was Executive Order number 28. Fast forward to just last week after the Glasgow summit, and Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 274, which established an interim greenhouse gas reduction target of 50% below 2006 levels by 2030. So the pressure is on to get this done with clean energy. Grid modernization is the key part of enabling and accelerating a much higher penetration of distributed energy resource. Also involved in that is risk modeling, understanding the balance and the intersection of reliability and resilience. And we're going to hear a lot of that topic today as we balance between reliability and resilience. And I am the program administrator for our grid modernization effort that we've undertaken as a proceeding right now. If you want to go to njcleanenergy.com/gridmod, you'll see our webpage for that. The next area really is to understand advanced technologies like batteries, hydrogen fuel cells, things like intelligent load management for both buildings and EV, electric vehicle charging, really can help optimize that connected distributed energy resource. So the bottom line is that resilience grows naturally to host clean distributed energy resource at the edge of a modernized and orchestrated grid. So with that, I will introduce briefly our speakers. First is Caitlin Murphy, who is a senior energy policy analyst at Economics and Forecasting Group at NREL with Grid Planning and Analysis Center. Next is Babu Chalamala. I hope I got that right. He's program manager for grid energy storage at Sandia National Lab, and also is a co-author on a recent paper issued by the IEEE Power and Energy Society. You're going to hear some more about that, entitled Resilience Framework, Methods and Metrics for the Electricity Sector. I think that's a very good piece of work and good to reference. And then last, we'll hear from Peter Muhoro, who is the Chief Strategy, Technology and Innovation Office for, I don't know quite how to pronounce the name of the energy company, but it's a fairly big one in Virginia that has, I think, 22 counties in Virginia that covers quite a few subscribers, and driving some very innovative programs such as energy storage and grid modernization. So practical frontline work being deployed there. And I believe the pronunciation is Rappahannock.
I will help you out. Rappahannock.
Rappahannock. Okay. Thank you with that. So with that, I will turn it over to Caitlin. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Paul. And thank you very much to NASEO for the opportunity to be here today. I'm just going to get my slides up and running. Okay. Is that coming through okay? Great. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caitlin Murphy, and as Paul said, I'm with the Grid Planning and Analysis Center at NREL. The main reason I wanted to mention that is that the remarks that you'll hear from me today and the perspective really will be most similar to what you might hear from a utility or a grid planner, focused on both grid modernization, but also how we maintain and improve our resilience as we move to a cleaner electricity mix. So the approach I'm taking in this presentation is to walk through some of NREL's recent analysis and research on advanced technologies and discuss how they relate to grid resilience. So I might introduce more questions than I do answers, but hopefully I'll give you a sense of some of the advanced technologies, data sets, and analyses that might be of interest to you and the energy providers in your states. So to provide a little bit of context, we developed this chart to really understand kind of the different challenges and different levels of difficulty that are associated with achieving a 100% clean or nearly 100% clean electricity system. So we see this evolution sort of, you can think of this as over time, or it's really plotted as sort of over the annual energy that's provided by renewable energy. And you can imagine that we're maybe pretty low on this curve still as we're just starting our acceleration towards these clean grid mixes. So in the near term, our main challenge is really trying to address some of these short-term variability problems. This is largely solved today by the technologies we already have developed, we're already starting to or have deployed on our grid system, just helping us deal with some of the short-term variability associated with forecast errors, the need to shift some of our production into the higher value, higher stress times of day, things like that, but largely sort of dealt with the technologies that we already have. As we continue our march towards a cleaner electricity system, though, we'll start to introduce some of these greater challenges associated with the diurnal mismatch, and ultimately what will be sort of seen as a seasonal problem. So this is just misalignment in when our renewable resources in particular are available and when our demand is being asked for from the grid. Of course, this is specific to our variable renewable resources, but all of our analyses show that this will make up a growing share of the electricity mix as we move towards 100% decarbonization. So this is sort of a technology agnostic view of the evolution of these challenges over time. But of course, one of the main advanced technologies that we are using to address these challenges is energy storage. So another way that we can look at a similar evolution here is by looking at the different types of energy storage and the different value that they provide to our electricity mix. So this first chart here is just in hours and showing how short duration storage can help us shift some of that excess generation during the day, in this case from PV, into the periods when we have higher demand as the sun is setting, as people are coming home. potentially wanting to, turn on their lights, charge their cars, things like that. Once we get past this sort of short duration storage stage, that's when we start to need more of a long duration storage that can help us shift energy over daily timescales. So maybe across the days in a week, maybe from week to week, but we're really just thinking about a couple of days of energy storage in this case. We already have technologies on our grid that address these types of challenges, like pump storage, for example. Finally, as we get really high up this curve and we're approaching a fully decarbonized grid, that's where we start to see the value and emergence of a seasonal storage that helps us use some of that extra production in certain seasons and shift it into the other seasons when maybe our renewable resources are not as strong and available. So ultimately what we'll need is kind of a combination of these technologies that might advance over time, but probably will be mixing and matching these technologies as they become available to address the challenges of our grid, and of course to address resilience, which is the topic we're focused on today. So the next couple of slides just walk through the different energy storage technologies and how they can contribute to our resilience based on some of our recent analyses from NREL. So this first chart just shows how standalone storage of even short duration can help support grid reliability and resilience by helping to reduce our expected shortfalls or load shortfalls by trying to avoid any mismatches that could happen due to major interruptions on the grid. So in this case, the scenario that we're looking at is a major natural gas disruption in the West, and understanding how different levels of energy storage might help us go from this relatively extreme scenario where we have a large shortfall in our energy provided, sort of lowering this curve, meaning that we're serving more and more of our load by dispatching that energy storage to help soak up our shortfall when we have a natural gas disruption, which of course we're relying on very heavily today. So the resilience benefits of energy storage are not a thing of the future. They're already here and helping us when we explore these scenarios where we have sort of unexpected disruptions in our energy supply. Of course, another form of energy storage that we're seeing increasingly on the grid is a hybrid configuration of energy storage. So more and more we're seeing interest in these hybrid technologies that combine renewable energy and energy storage together to basically make sure that the energy storage has a local source of charging. So this has economic benefits, of course, for the developer, but it's also increasingly being considered as a resilient solution, since charging locally means we don't have to worry about any disruptions that might occur upstream due to any disruptions along distribution or transmission lines. So another form of energy storage that we're already seeing deployed on the grid, already economic in certain conditions across the country today, and has resilience benefits, especially on a local scale. But as we march up that curve, as I showed before, that's when we're expecting to see more value and more of a role for longer duration and seasonal storage technologies. Of course, this is a big category. I've labeled it as just these two types of energy storage, but ultimately the exact mix and the resources that we'll need will depend on the requirements of the grid, and it'll also depend on local and regional characteristics. So there are many types of long duration and seasonal storage technologies that are already under development today, are already being researched and potentially tested on the grid. These can include things like mechanical storage, electrochemical storage, and then of course chemical storage, which would be the hydrogen option in terms of a long duration or seasonal storage technology that could then be deployed and used through fuel cell technologies or through renewable combustion turbine technologies as well in the future. The timing and emergence of these technologies on the grid really depends on the pace of decarbonization, and it's also going to depend on its competition with other firm, low emitting or zero emitting technologies that can provide firm capacity to the grid. So not to say that these things will definitely come to fruition in the future. Certainly we don't know which types would. All of our analysis indicates that these will be competitive in the future under different cost projections, but the exact mix and duration of storage that would be most beneficial to the grid is highly unknown. It really depends on which renewable resources are being leveraged in a given location. It depends on sort of what those shortfalls are across the year and how much seasonal storage you need versus long duration storage, whether your load is aligning with the availability of your zero emitting resources on a local scale. But of course, we don't have to wait this long just to see the benefits of long duration and seasonal storage. Another focus of our analysis today is if you start to think more about the resilience benefits of these technologies, that's where you start to see sort of a nearer term motivation for deploying these on the grid. Sorry about that. So this is just a couple of examples from ERCOT. where we looked at really poor conditions for solar and wind, and understanding how some of these long duration and seasonal storage technologies can really help improve resilience. So in the bottom here, in this kind of drab green color, you can see the role of renewable combustion turbines in these scenarios, where the variable renewable resources are not as available as we would hope they would be on this day, based on our load profiles, and really seeing the benefits of having that hydrogen stored to be used in a later time, making sure that our grid is resilient against these sort of low resource days. At the top, in some of these darker red shading, you can also see the role of some of the longer duration storage technologies that also fill in more on this hourly timescale, but help because of their greater economics when you don't have to worry about quite as long of a duration of shifting in your energy storage technologies. But of course, energy storage is not the only advanced technology that can help us with the resilience of the grid today and in the future. A couple of other examples here. First, just wanted to mention the role that demand-side flexibility can play to support resilience. Here, what's demonstrated is sort of an hourly shifting of load, where we can take our loads from times when the resources might be less available and shift them into times when we have a lot of low cost and also zero emitting generation available. This is one use case for demand-side flexibility, but you could also think about load shedding as another resilience strategy, where especially when you can see these high stress periods coming, maybe a low renewable resource, high load time, you can call on some of your resources that might be able to shed load for a couple of hours or a day or two, if they're able to maintain service to the broader geographic area. Of course, the potential for this strategy grows as electrification increases as well, if we're pursuing multiple different strategies for decarbonization. Especially what we found in our analysis is that the dominance of electric vehicle charging, and especially flexible or managed vehicle charging, can really support grid resilience. And to help inform those types of discussions, we do have a couple of planning tools that we've released recently. I chose an example here from Virginia, because I know Peter will be speaking about this region in his presentation. But what we've done is release some data sets for projections of different levels of electric vehicle adoption at a county level, trying to understand where we might see the prominence of these technologies and plan for them, both from sort of a resource planning perspective, but also for trying to understand the potential resilience risks and benefits of such technologies. Small modular reactors are potentially another key technology of the grid in the future. However, their prominence on the grid really depends on a lot of uncertain characteristics. So trying to understand what their safety characteristics might look like, and also the cost and performance of these technologies. So still early in their evolution and hard to tell what their role would be in the future, but certainly another source of firm low emitting capacity, especially as we approach 100% renewable or 100% decarbonized grid. And of course, I've mostly focused on the potential benefits of these advanced technologies for grid resilience, but it's also important to consider and address the resilience risks that they could introduce, which are most often discussed in the framing of cybersecurity and just understanding kind of those different communications channels, making sure everything is secure and that we're not introducing new vulnerabilities into the grid. The final thing I just wanted to mention is that, of course, we want to plan for as resilient of a grid as we can have, but undoubtedly there will be situations where we can't avoid the grid going down, either because we're overwhelmed by a natural hazard of some sort, or because of a bad actor, somebody bringing down the grid in a way that we couldn't prepare for or we weren't adequately prepared for. So this is where other strategies are also really important and would also depend on our advanced technology solutions. So the first sort of big bucket in this category is customer resilience. There's a lot of research going on today to really understand how we can improve the resilience of individual customers' homes or individual buildings to maintain their survivability in the case of a long duration outage event. So this is really trying to understand the benefits of energy efficiency measures as a potential solution for making sure customers can stay in their homes if the grid is down for an extended period of time. Another strategy lies in this community resilience approach. So trying to design and strategically place microgrids to maximize customers' ability to access critical services during major events. So this example here is really meant to highlight how when you start to think about resilience as a value stream of sorts, based on the benefits it provides to the community, you start to change the design of your microgrid a little bit. So maybe you keep the same level of photovoltaic generation on your microgrid, but now you want a much bigger battery and perhaps a longer duration battery to make sure that you can maintain those critical loads for a longer period of time. make sure your customers and your citizens have access to those critical services if the grid isn't able to be serving them for a couple of days. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I do have, when these slides are shared, there's a couple of resources here and links that are available to look into more of these analyses and the data sets behind them. But that's everything I prepared. Thank you again for this opportunity. And I'll hand it back to Paul.
Okay, thank you. That was great. As usual, NREL has really some powerful toolkit. And now on to the next powerful laboratory, which is Sandia. And we have Dr. Babu Chalamala to tell us a little bit about the paper that he co-authored, as well as some of the work that Sandia is doing on energy storage and other resilient grid edge items and technologies. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Paul. My focus is primarily going to be on the IEEE technical report we have done last year, not much on the energy storage work we do at Sandia. So this is, I'm representing here the IEEE Industrial Technical Support Leadership Committee. We had a task force last year looking at, what is the framework for resiliency and what are the methods and metrics we need to think about as an industry. So, Kelsey, can you go to the next slide? Okay, there were a lot of people involved in this effort in this working group. This was chaired by Bill Chu from Southern Cal Edison and a number of members of the IEEE PES and the leadership committee. So we worked on probably 6 months of effort, and we released an IEEE report, and along with a sizable presentation deck on resiliency metrics. So what I'm presenting today is a short summary of this work, and I have sent Kelsey the technical report and the full deck of the presentation that is available for this group. And these are the people that have been part of this work. So I think, as you look at the next slide, you have definitional issues. I think, we are familiar with what reliability is, and I think, we have a good sense of reliability. And the question is always, what is resilience? So you have the typical dictionary definition of, capacity to recover from difficulties and toughness is one. Then you have the FRUC definition, ability to withstand a reduced magnitude, duration of disruptive events. That's one definition. Then we have a more broader DOE definition, which is, ability of a power system and its components to withstand and adapt to disruptions and rapidly recover from them. That's the DOE way of saying resiliency. So if you look at all these definitions, we don't really have a consistent metrics on how do you measure resiliency. That's part of our work in this group. And also looking at what are the toolkits available, what are the tools available for the industry to get some level of commonality on how we define resiliency and how we measure it. So that's part of the purpose of this work. Kelsey, can you go to the next slide? So the broader effort for us as a group was, what are the standardized metrics we can use for resiliency, and do we have a good framework for quantifying resiliency? So you'll see, over the next few slides what we have done, and for a bigger and more comprehensive discussion, you can look into the report. Okay, so if you look at currently, you have basically two existing metrics. One comes from the IEEE Power Society's Distribution Resiliency Working Group. This resiliency working group primarily looks from resiliency, from storm resiliency, how fast the system can recover in the first 12 hours of a storm from customers losing power is one. Then you have the non-storm gray sky days, and so there's one big category of things, and that's commonly used by the industry nowadays. The IEEE working group definition of resiliency in the metric. Then you have a much broader multi-criteria data analysis that the DOE uses as a performance-based metric. And that has, accounts for roughly 1,200 attributes grouped into 250 categories. And for most people, to get the data sets needed to be able to make a definitive analysis of how the system is resilient is rather complex. I mean, if you look at the DOE metrics, the number of consequence series, you have, service, critical services, restoration, what are the monetary issues, and then the indirect stuff like functioning of services, monetary issues, and other critical things. So, you don't really have an easy way to understand and quantify these things. So, Kelsey, go to the next slide, please. So I think, part of the complexity we had was how do you define resilience that takes a more simplistic approach, and how do you benchmark it so that, you have a comparative way of defining resiliency across the industry, and also provide the tools to make, improvements in a more meaningful way. So the bottom line is, you don't have a really one metric that fits for all the needs. So you have to think about, other factors, including both size, regional issues, functionality, and the businesses. So what we have done is, look a summary of, what are the existing tools and what needs to happen. Okay, so if you have qualitative metrics, this is something which you all are familiar with. We can look at the different aspects of the energy infrastructure and see what the capabilities we have to become resilient, and then general ways of looking at the evaluation methods, checklists, questionnaires, and those are much more simplistic. So there's a qualitative way of doing it. Then this doesn't really give a comprehensive view of the system. So go to the next slide, please. Then you got a much more broader quantitative metrics, which are performance-based. Look at the what are the consequences are, and are you able to make decisions quickly, and it's a lot more a meaningful way of getting what are the performance based resiliency metrics. So that's other approach. Go to the next slide, please. And then much more broader all hazards type approach. You're looking at some level of predictive analysis, understanding the threats in advance, and scenario modeling during the event and before the event, and then what actions can an operator can do, and then what are the recovery modes are, and how fast we are recovering, and are there possibilities to mitigate the damage. So it's a much more coordinated approach of doing things. But the challenge is, there is still don't have all the tools to do all these things for the industry. So go to the next slide, please. So our job as part of this working group was, do a catalog of all the things available currently, and where things are being implemented, and what are the things that we need to have as we look into the future. So the next few slides, you will see the tools we have currently and the tools that are coming in place, and what is needed for the future. So if you look at the next slide, you have different things. You have the planning scenarios, grid hardening, and all those things that people are already doing. And then we already have technologies like VAX and protection, control, and management issues, vegetation management, and some level of hardening of the T&D system. Planning tools are evolving quickly. You have the planning tools for transient stability analysis, small signal analysis. They're not really implemented widely, but they're coming in. And then some level of modeling scenarios for extreme events, and what happens to the system in case of those kind of things. Then go from the deterministic to probabilistic models to evaluate how the system is going to respond. So these are all the different things that in some way are being deployed at some level or other, but they're not consistent practices on what needs to happen. Go to the next slide, please. So what does the industry needs? We need to better codes and standards for resiliency, which we don't have. We don't really consistently use climate forecasting and modeling tools to better handle the operations. We talk about real-time situational awareness, including outage reporting. Some places it's fairly well established, but it's not consistent practices across the industry. And then how do you recover quickly? What are the operational modes, and how will the system have the tools to do it? And fast way of knowing where the real weak points are in the system in case of disruptive events. That's another thing. And do we have all the decision support tools for prevention and in case of in response from disturbances? And the data is becoming good. I think, how do we use all the data sets available to be able to respond in case of an emergency? So the industry, needs to have a better toolkits than what we currently have and start integrating with these tools. I mean, protection, sensing, and all those things are there, but they're not fully deployed. Go to the next slide, please. So if you look at what we have currently, I mean, we have synchro phasers deployed in many places. It's becoming common. Utilities are using drones for situational awareness and understanding the system's condition. And then better control of DERs and energy storage, as Caitlin talked earlier, and demand management is the other thing. And microgrids are becoming more prevalent, but I think, going from microgrid to aligning mode is still a challenge, and also integrating large-scale renewables and transitioning is also, I think, it's an ongoing effort. And we don't really have all the online tools that we need to have, either forecasting or assessments of security and all those things real time. But those are coming up. And then on top of that, then the system still has a lot of interdependency between electric and gas and water, and now communications is becoming a lot more prevalent. So how do we handle the interdependencies, and do we have a robust way of understanding all the issues? Go to the next slide, please. And then you have the emerging tool sets, planning tools, and methods to prioritize your investments, understanding the risk much better, and what are the probability is, and real-time monitoring. I think as we deploy more and more communication infrastructure with our grid infrastructure, I think we'll have a better handle on monitoring and also controlling the assets. And the communication technology becomes even more significantly important as we start integrating a lot more electronic driven resources, either inverter-based resources or EVs and other things coming to the picture. So that's the other area, I think, emerging area, and I think in some ways those are not being fully utilized, but they're coming. So go to the next slide, please. So if you look at what the companies like ComEd are doing, and you have visual data analytics at some level, those are the easy things to do, and those are being done. I think quickly getting a grasp on where things are, and then bit more complex needs a level of technology and resources to be able to look at weather data collection, modeling that, understanding where lightning happens, real-time visualization of lightning, and tracking things, weather events, and all the other aspects that are, I think, more complex and more advanced, but those are also being, implemented in some sense or other. Then you have much more broader level of technical complexity. That those are, I think, things that people are really looking at right now, and those are also requires significant investments. So that's probably my last slide. So I think this is kind of what we had in the report, but I think if you look at the report that is available, you'll get a good sense of all the issues that the industry looks at. and the opportunities that we have in coming up with what are the good metrics for understanding resiliency and how to implement it. So with that, I would be happy to take questions at the end.
Very good. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. I know IEEE does some great work. Hopefully they'll get to a metric that's as simple as SAIDI and SAFE.
Yeah.
That could represent resilience, because then there will be an actual number you can point
Right.
to.
Yeah. It may not be that simple, but I think
Might not
we
be.
need to
No,
come
I'm
down.
sure it won't be. But okay. Now our last speaker, and I will now attempt to get this properly pronounced, from Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, Dr. Peter Muhoro will give us the on-the-ground customer-facing focus at the grid modernization, an energy storage project, and some real deployment of resilient elements. So take it away, Peter.
Thanks, Paul. And trust me, it took me a long time to also be able to say the names. You're not the only one. I've been there before. So
Okay, thank you.
glad to be here today. Thank you to the team for the invitation to share some things that we're doing here. REC, we'll make it very simple and just call it REC. And to all, if there's anyone from Virginia, give me a shout out, and would love to visit with you at some point. Talk about the things we're doing here locally for all the Virginia folks. Let me begin by introducing who Rappahannock is. If we can go to the next slide. We're one of the largest distribution co-ops in the United States, serving about 22 parts of 22 counties, a 4,000 square mile territory, ranging with about 172,000 connections to date that we power throughout here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, carrying 17,500 miles of distribution lines. So we serve both urban areas, but also very rural areas as well, on average about 10 accounts per meter. And this is all being done with a strong team of 430 plus employees, and trying to hire as many as we can to continue the great job we're doing. I always want to call out our mission, and really our mission is connecting our members and our communities to provide affordable, safe, and reliable energy solutions. And that is what drives us. So when we sit back and look at what is our power supply mix here at REC, so we primarily purchase power from Old Dominion Electric Cooperative, and that is a generation and transmission co-op headquartered in Glen Island, Virginia, just down in the Richmond area. And that's where we get about 95% of our power, a little bit over a gigawatt in loads. And then we have a few out there in the market with Morgan Stanley, and also a little bit on the Southeast Power, that we do get some hydro from there as well. We can go to the next slide. When you look at ODEC is one of the first GNTs, cooperatives in the nation who issued a net zero carbon dioxide emission goal that by 2050, they would be net zero. And in fact, with an interim goal of reducing that by 50% from the 2005 levels by 2030. So a lot of progress when you look at our power supply. But when I sit back and we begin to ask ourselves, okay, we know where, and Virginia has the Clean Energy Economy Act. Electric co-ops are actually exempt from it, but we are driving towards such a goal. All the co-ops in Virginia want to see we're driving towards a clean and renewable energy grid. But the big thing about it is we have to address what we see on the distribution side. And as I always say, we don't get the calls that someone came home and they turned on their lights and the lights came on, so thank you. That's not what the calls we get. The typical calls we get is, when's my power going to be back on, and why is my bill so high? That is just the reality of what we face as electric utilities. And so as we begin to see the direction on power supply on the distribution side, what do we have to do? So I want to show you all a quick video here to introduce a little bit that we're doing from a resiliency standpoint, and then I'll get into it a little bit more. And I don't think we're getting the sound, Kelsey, on this.
Can you see it? Can you hear now?
No.
Let me hang on 1 second. I will try to rectify that.
We still don't hear it, but if it's okay, I can I can find the link to send folks. It's just a video about the battery, but I'm going to talk about it anyway.
Yeah, apologies. Somehow my computer doesn't play the sound.
It's a thing with Zoom. I've experienced it before, so I'm always like, I hope it works. It only works about 35% of the time, so we're good with that. But if we can go on to the next slide, I'll introduce the battery itself, and I could send a link with the video. If you go to our website, you can find it. But essentially what it is we installed a battery in Spotsylvania County at one of our substations. It's a 2 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour battery, essentially looking at if in the time of an outage, we could get about 1,000 homes powered for about 8 hours. That is, we were the first electric co-op in Virginia to have a grid scale battery, and we're not done yet because we see the opportunities that exist when we look at batteries. We can go to the next slide, and you ask, why did we do batteries? And the bottom line was several different things. One is we looked at increased resiliency. We continue to see a situation where, weather patterns could be very different. Sometimes we could suffer a transmission outage and that kind of thing. So we wanted to make sure that, it's not just a matter of how quick you bounce back, but it's a matter of how long can you, how well can you stay connected. And so we wanted to make sure that we can continue to address issues of resiliency on this. But at the same time, we looked at, okay, we see what our wholesale power costs look like, and the dynamics of, having to, we've done a great job with our demand response programs in reducing load during those peak times. But we recognize if we could discharge a battery at that time, the economics, as we begin to pair different use cases of batteries, that's what makes batteries so unique, is that we could pair different use cases to be able to understand how some of this works. And so we looked at, for our benefits, we looked at, that wholesale power cost. But in addition to that, where we located this battery, and let me just point out that part of our thinking on this was, we began with even looking at our worst performance circuits and where they were located. And one of the things we realized with this specific substation, it's a substation that feeds another substation as well. But what we're seeing is a lot of growth in the area. And so at some point, we knew we would have to upgrade, if not both substations, at least one of them. And so we figured out a battery is actually a good extender to be able to defer some of those upgrades on the transmission and distribution side of it as we experience growth, but yet still give us many other things. And in addition to that, we're looking at the whole, if we were to pair renewables with this, how would we integrate that? Now, in this specific case, we did not necessarily, this is a standalone battery, not connected to a renewable source, but we do believe that that's could potentially be some of the ones that we see in the future as we look at more and more integration of renewables, especially solar, throughout our territory here in Central Virginia. So batteries begin to really make a lot of sense for what we need as we look at resiliency. We believe that the economics of batteries today, I have been at the forefront of this for many years. I served on the Energy Storage Association board, so I saw batteries decline year after year in terms of cost, and we believe they're at a point where they make economic sense to be able to do them. So we can look at it from a resiliency standpoint. We have been live with this battery now for several months, and it has worked very well. We have some lessons learned, and that's the great thing about this. It's you get some educational side of it in addition to that. We'll go to the next slide, please. So when we think of this too, we look at it from what does our energy services and solutions look like? And that's a big piece of when we think resiliency. More and more consumers want to have control of their energy and be able to do different things. when you walk up to the door, you want the door to open, the garage to open. You want to be able to charge your car at home and all these different things. Oh, you want to put solar on your roof and that kind of thing. And so we've been looking at how do we look at this and look at resiliency specifically in how we address this situation. So you can go to the next slide. Some of our strategy specifically is looking at three components. One is distributed generation. How do we increase, promote, and bring up the potential of more and more distributed energy into our systems, including batteries and the like. And in fact, even today we have several generators in the case of 10 to about 10,000 or so generators. The other side of it is we look at how do we promote more and more energy efficiency, and we believe that this addresses a lot of resiliency. I've always been known to say the most expensive unit of energy is the one you do not have. The second most is the one that is not used wisely. So we're promoting a lot more energy efficiency programs, including an energy efficiency weatherization upgrade program that we finance on the electric bill through a tariff model. And so that's a big piece of it. And lastly, the vision for us is, how do we get more and more batteries and backup power on the residential side. We can go to the next slide, please. So we see the behind the meter storage being a big piece of what our future looks like in terms of resiliency and even advanced technologies. I'm not going to get too much into this slide. You have the information and it's material that you've seen, but we could see the potential of where a battery can be used in terms of charging and discharging. That works out very well for our peak times as well. And so we know that there's opportunities here. We're working on partnering with our membership. In fact, we've done this now. We're rolling out some batteries within our offices and playing with them as if we were the behind the meter individual, and looking at how do we translate that to not only just address the peak demand that we might have, but also in terms of just times that we might have some outages, how that would play out. And so we should have some data here in the next few months as we look at how those batteries are functioning. We'll go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about electric vehicles and what we're doing. This is a big piece on resiliency. As you all know, the opportunity that exists with electric vehicles is large. You could see up to about 30% of additional loads in a home, depending on how many cars they have or so. And that creates an interesting dynamic from a planning perspective of your utility. And so we're taking this very seriously. We can go to the next slide. A little bit complicated of a slide here when we look at our planning, and I'll just position it from two perspectives. When you look at the top diagram, that is really talking about what our industry trends, benchmarking, what our members are looking for, and what's in our territory, looking at what is our strategic plan as we look at EVs and how we roll out programs, how we roll out different things for our membership. The second side of it is we're looking at essentially what I will call transformer loading and looking at every single transformer. So let me give the example of a simple 15 kVA pole mount transformer, for example, that could be serving one home. If that home adds one level 2 charger, that's 7.2 kW. You can see the problems that we're going to be facing as a utility. So as we look at our strategic plan, as we begin to look at where will we see the clustering, we're also looking at the grid impacts on this and how we begin to upgrade our systems. But in addition to that, a big piece of this will be managed charging, and I'll talk a little bit about that on how we get there towards the end of my remarks, because I don't believe we can upgrade the system fast enough based on how fast electric vehicles are going to come to market. So we have to think of other strategies to ensure that we have resilient systems that can withstand the expectations of the load. We can go to the next slide. One thing that we've decided to introduce just to get a feel of how things are going is a new program that essentially it's an incentive for people to charge during the off-peak hours, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., giving about $7 a month. And this is a pilot rate. We believe we'll have a lot of changes to this, but essentially we're looking at hopefully a commission approval by the end of this year is what we believe, and all vehicles, electric or plug-ins, eligible for this. We can go to the next slide. And a piece of making this all happen, we understand some of the challenges with a lot of these different things, especially behind the meter, is the financing side of it, and especially even for the low to moderate income, and being able to access financing. So I talked about we're launching a new energy efficiency weatherization program. That's the first piece of how we're going to finance this, using a model called PAYS, where we provide the financing, they repay on the electric bill, and it's a win-win for everyone. And then we'll look at expanding that for many other programs. And then lastly, I'm just going to close out with if we can go to the very last slide, what I believe is the big piece of how we address resiliency. It's just the slide before that one, but it's really the whole concept of artificial intelligence, and this really driving how we consume energy. I truly believe one of the things we'll have to think about is how do we help our consumers consume at the right time as we think about how we upgrade our grid. And so we're moving into data disaggregation, being able to show our consumers where they spend the most, and also helping them understand when is the best time for them to consume that energy, rather than just come home, plug in, and that's it. Maybe find a way to manage that depending on their consumption needs. And that, I think, is a big piece of resiliency that we'll need to address. So with that, I know we're a little bit over the time allocated, but open to any questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate that. Great overview, and great that you brought electric fields into it. I'll throw out the first question we have is for you, actually. But before we get started, I'll just throw out a little frightening evolving statistic: is that medium and heavy duty vehicle charging, new standards are being developed right now. They're talking about 1 megawatt per vehicle. So times 10 trucks, I think we may need to throw in a modular nuclear reactor for that. So, and who knows, maybe I'm only half joking. So, okay. So let's, the first question we had for you relative to this is, are you or will you implement a demand response program, or better yet, grid interactive programs like smart thermostats, water heaters, behind the meter battery, sort of as grid resources and virtual power plants? That's the question. And I know Virginia is different from other states, and there are programs that FERC's driving for DER aggregation, which is sort of a related topic. So I'll let you answer that question, and maybe we could open that.
Absolutely. And first of all, the realities of what you said were very true. If you think of a Tesla 8-bay charging fast charger, that's about a 1.2 megawatt load. A
Right.
40 apartment unit building is about a 1 megawatt load.
Yeah.
It takes about 3 years to plan for that.
Right.
The Tesla supercharger needs to be up and running in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
It's a big challenge for utilities, and we have to think differently. Status quo cannot work anymore. The way we've always done it cannot work. So kudos to your point on that. And I feel like if I had hair, I would lose more of it thinking about it. Now, to address your question, we're actually doing all those things today. Today, we control hot water heaters. We have smart thermostats out there. We have a program with Ecobee. We run a pick, we call it Beat the Pick program, where we actually incent for people to, we just finished the second year of a pilot that was approved by the commission. We believe they'll open it up to everyone, where you reduce your load, and depending on what, on those, when we announce it's a peak day, and we've seen a lot more what I would call behavioral demand response. And part of why I talked about why we're encouraging a lot more batteries behind the meter, and even being able to utilize some of the generators we have out there, is because we truly believe we can begin to aggregate those and use them to be able to address peak times, especially. And so it is in the planning. We have them somewhat, with the exception of the batteries and the generators being able to use them. The other pieces are really now the big piece for us is, what is that platform that can help us run all of this? That is the big challenge for my team this coming next few months, is to figure out a platform that we could help to, because we cannot do them individually like we've always done them. We need to have a collective way to do it. Once we get the platform, then we begin to address how we deal with those. Now, I will throw a caveat out there. There's a problem of connectivity, especially in rural areas. So how do we get the connectivity, so broadband plays another role here on how, we can get connectivity to actually communicate with those devices. But that is, and in fact, we look at the FARC 2222 order in terms of, aggregation and everything. We think as a distribution cooperative, I think it's an opportunity. And while it may not apply to us, we actually want to do those things. We want to aggregate them and sub them into our mix so that it can help us overall, and it's a win-win for everyone. So yes,
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Babu, a question for you. Related to, I think what Peter brought up, artificial intelligence. I know IEEE PES is working on some of that. They have a technical activities area for smart buildings, loads, and customer systems. So everything at the far edge of the grid. Is there any areas that in your discussion and thoughts where artificial intelligence could play a role?
Well, I mean, IEEE has started a new coordinating committee called the Energy Internet Coordinating Committee that became active only this year to look at exactly the same kind of aspects. I think, the communications is one area, data is other area. Those, I think, will start playing a bigger role. I would say that because as you start looking at integration of EVs, all the DERs coming in, you're moving electrons through power electronics. So the interfaces and the cybersecurity protocols for those devices start interacting. And that's an area that partly plays into the resiliency, partly plays into the security. That's one. But looking at the data side, I think, all the things Peter talked about, demand management, and being able to, manage loads and charging infrastructure and how to charge where and all those things. Those are all fairly data driven. And the whole topic around, energy informatics is coming big into the system. And so we started a new coordinating committee just to look at, a broad-based approach to the energy information. So
it's amazing to watch this area that Amazon didn't start big data, but they certainly made it available, and all the artificial intelligence and mining and capabilities that's coming with that. So,
but in the end, I think there are things that the industry can do. Not every utility is can implement all the things that you want to have, but at the same time, you have to give tools to the customers are able to do these things in a much more simplistic way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we heard that from Peter, simplifying. So Caitlin, let's turn to the future. So I half jokingly threw out the idea of a modular nuclear reactor coincident with 10 1-megawatt chargers at a truck stop depot. What's the practical reality of that? Is that a technology that's, not that implementation, but are modular nuclear reactors close? Is hydrogen close? Is self-driving vehicles that can route to their own node on the grid to either give or take energy? Is any of that close? And how do we gear up for that? Maybe that's too broad a question.
No, it's fine. I hesitate to be an authority in this area, but what we have seen is, we're increasingly representing all of these technologies in our models. So we're recognizing the need for some additional firm capacity that is fully dispatchable, can be large scale, or at least, when it's aggregated together, can be large scale. And we don't know what that's going to be. I wouldn't say small modular reactors are close. I wouldn't say hydrogen is sort of on the precipice by any means of becoming commercial. Maybe these things are where storage was a decade ago. I think a decade ago, you could have found plenty of people who would have told you energy storage will never be cost competitive, which they were clearly proven wrong now that we can look back on those comments. Yeah. So I wouldn't say close, but I would say, we know that we need these types of technologies, and this is the role of federal investment in research and development. This is the role of all the companies that are emerging to try to fill these gaps of what we can see we need on the future grid. Exactly what form it's going to take, I think it's still to be determined. I was just participating in an SMR conference last week with Boise State, talking about some of the major safety challenges that they still have to overcome. So I think everything is going to have a barrier. You know, it's not clear who is going to be providing this firm capacity in the future, but we do know we need it. And thankfully, there's a lot of active research and development going on to try to fill that gap.
Right. Very good. Well, I do think to some extent, or at least supplemented, it will be virtualized and aggregated from a lot of smaller things, along with some pretty big parts, you know, that are. But going back to my opening comments, it all relies on a modernized grid that is flexible enough to absorb it and orchestrate and balance it. So I think we're at the top of the hour. So do we have time for additional questions, or how do we want to, or do we want to wrap up?
I think we'll just wrap up. If there are any outstanding questions, I would just invite the person to send us an email and we can route them to the appropriate speakers. So thank you so much, Paul, Caitlin, Peter, and Babu for this excellent panel. I'm really inspired and I have a lot of ideas for additional webinars, including one on AI, I think is the time to talk about that in the energy sector. So very exciting, and everybody attending, thank you so much. We will send out the slides and the recording after the webinar, as well as the video that Peter unfortunately wasn't able to play. Apologies for that. But again, thank you and have a nice evening or morning wherever you are.